In this comic, Godzilla Kills God, and it's amazing. Check this out. So this takes place in a comic called Godzilla in Hell. Spans for 5 issues, written by 5 different people. The art styles change from issue to issue, so you'll see it change over the course of this video. So basically, Godzilla is sent to Hell after effectively destroying the Earth with his atomic breath. And as soon as he gets there, there's just this giant sign, right? Abandon all hope, ye who enter here, which Godzilla doesn't care anything about, uses his atomic breath, and just like destroys the entirety of this thing, and then just starts like traversing his way through hell. And as he does this, like this giant tentacle monster comes out of nowhere and just like attacks him, and then he just obliterates this thing because he's Godzilla and that's what he does. After this, he comes across just like what looks like a giant cloud off in the distance, and Godzilla, right, ever the curious guy, you can't fault him for that, rolls up on this cloud only to find out that it's just a boatload of humans. The one thing Godzilla does not care anything about. Why? Because it's like the whole Godzilla mythos for him to just like show up on Earth every so often, smack humanity around a little bit, and then go back home, right? So literally Godzilla just like makes his way through this cloud of human beings only to come across a demonic Godzilla. Now, having said that, I know a little bit about the Godzilla mythos, so if this dude actually exists and actually has a name, post it down below in the comments section. But I gotta say, man, a demonic looking Godzilla looks amazing. And he even just like morphs into just this gigantic evil looking entity type thing. And like Godzilla doesn't care because like this dude like wraps his tentacles around him and just like starts smacking Godzilla around the way Hulk just smacked Loki around in the first Avengers movie, which just feels and hits different now after the end of the Loki series. But like Godzilla just doesn't care, right? He's just like, dude, come on, man. Like if that's all you got, if this is like the greatest of threats here, then like I'll be out of this place and I'll be back home in time for cornflakes. Because like this thing tries to like pull Godzilla in, and it actually does, right? It like pulls Godzilla into itself. It seems like it's basically won. And then Godzilla just like literally blows this thing to pieces. And he's like, next. The funny thing about this is like this kind of portal opens up below him and Godzilla falls down to another level, right? So then when that happens, right, as he's making his way through here, he's just kind of like exploring. There's like this gigantic devil pterodactyl that looks like Rodan, and it probably is some demonic version of this thing that like kind of swoops around him and hangs out. And then it decides the best thing that it should do is attack Godzilla, which is a terrible decision because Godzilla just like obliterates this thing in one hit. Literally, he hits it with his tail once, and this thing just like crashes down into one of the domed cities in hell, and then Godzilla just leaves. But when he does, right, once he gets out here, there's just like this giant dragon looking creature, which looks more like a Leviathan than anything else. Although technically I think they're referring to Godzilla as a Leviathan in this. The battle's kind of cool, right? I'm not gonna lie, it is kind of awesome. But like, again, much like with that Rodan looking thing, Godzilla just takes this thing out in like one hit. And like, that's it, which is just kind of amazing to see because it's like, dude, there's all these like gigantic, just demonic, crazy looking eldritch creatures. And like, none of it matters to Godzilla because he's the king of monsters. Like, of course he would crush these guys. The real question is, why aren't they following him around, right? You would think they would realize how dominant Godzilla is and just be like, I'm gonna go hang out with that dude because it's better to be on the devil's right hand than in his path. But the crazy thing here is that even when this creature is more or less destroyed by Godzilla, that's when King Ghidorah emerges. Now, here's the thing. Son. I know enough about Godzilla to know that King Ghidorah is not the guy to be slept on, right? Like this dude is on a whole different level. Unfortunately, we don't even get to see a full fight between the two of them because as soon as King Ghidorah shows up, he just like kind of opens this portal, or at least the portal's open, and then Godzilla just like falls down into it. So you never get to see Godzilla and King Ghidorah fight in hell, which would have been amazing had we been able to see that. But following that, you basically switch over to Godzilla and kind of like this demonic representation of essentially Earth, and specifically like Brazil, right? The giant statue of Jesus that exists out there. But the funny thing here is you basically have like Space Godzilla, like this demonic looking Space Godzilla. I always thought Space Godzilla was kind of cool. I always thought he looked more like a Power Rangers villain than anything else, but I always did think he looked kind of cool. But the funny thing here is like with Space Godzilla, like he literally attacks Godzilla himself and sets him on fire. which is kind of amazing, right? So you literally have like Godzilla who's engulfed in flames fighting Space Godzilla, and it's dope. The battle is so intense that like it lets off this massive kind of atomic explosion and blows up like this version of Earth, essentially, right? Like this hellish version of Earth. But then like Godzilla wakes up in what basically looks like heaven. And it's like this giant mountain that exists out there. And there's all like these butterfly dudes who are kind of coming out of nowhere. I know, it looks like Godzilla has just literally started tripping balls, right? Like Godzilla's on acid. So the thing here is that even when Godzilla gets to this mountain, he tries to like climb it and it immediately just like pushes him off, right? He has like nothing for this. And then in turn, he's just told like submit, serve peace, right? So this is clearly God, right? That's literally who this guy represents. I think it's kind of weird that God is just a giant amorphous blob of eyes and teeth surrounded by butterfly people, but it is kind of interesting, right? Because like when one of them decides to fly down and be Godzilla's friend, Godzilla helps them understand what happens when you try to be Godzilla's friend. Bad things happen. Like it sucks to be friends with Godzilla because when you're friends with Godzilla, you die. And that's what happens to this dude. This dude gets killed. So God gets pissed off, opens a portal and banishes Godzilla back to hell. So then in turn, Godzilla just kind of like wakes up here and like Space Godzilla reemerges again. Just like God's laughing at him, like literally God's laughing at Godzilla. Godzilla's like, okay, cool, man. I'm not gonna forget this. Like, just so you know, I'm coming back and I'm gonna clap God's cheeks. So the thing about this is Godzilla faces off against Space Godzilla again, but in the midst of this whole fight, like while he's being taunted, which in effect, this is more or less Satan kind of manifesting as Space Godzilla, if we're being honest with ourselves, like God decides to lend Godzilla a hand, even though Godzilla's eating all the little evil, demonic henchmen type people of the devil. And then in turn, like sends all the little butterfly people from heaven down to hell to help Godzilla basically defeat like Satan, which is kind of a cool thing because Godzilla in turn just like absorbs all this like divine energy. So even when Satan's just like blasting him with his breath, it doesn't make any difference. Godzilla just like blows this dude apart with his atomic breath. And then like literally God opens a portal up and is like, hey man, so like now that you've defeated Satan and basically ended the war against good and evil, you want to come hang out? And Godzilla's like, no man, but I didn't forget the time that you sent me down here like 20 minutes ago. So now everybody's got to die. And he just like blasts the whole thing with like his atomic breath, literally uses the power of God against God. And seemingly the dude's obliterated along with all the butterfly people because Godzilla eats the rest of them. And so finally, Godzilla ends up coming across this being who's more powerful than God and Satan. Literally this being who exists out there that guards the gates of people trying to escape this afterlife and getting back to the land of the living. And it's kind of messed up the way that it looks, right? It's just like almost reminiscent of the way that God looked, but instead it's like this giant kind of like Cthulhu looking tentacle monster that sits atop this tower, right? Like this giant rock tower, more or less. And like when it sees Godzilla, Godzilla tries to climb up the mountain and it just like swats him away. Like with the greatest of ease. Well, technically it creates a giant landslide that comes crashing down and buries Godzilla. But like nothing Godzilla can do is able to overcome this guy. So in turn, Godzilla just allows all these just like evil forces that initially worked for Satan and now that he's basically out of the picture, like they've been following him the whole time. So in turn, like they consume the entirety of Godzilla's flesh, right? Down to the bone. The crazy thing about this is that Godzilla was still powered by divine energy. So when that happens, they all effectively become henchmen of Godzilla. They start working for him. And so then they all just start like firing off their atomic breath all at once, literally just like millions of these things, right? It's like Goku doing the Kamehameha when he was firing it off, like he was literally charging it up when he was up in the sky above Cell and then like teleported down at the last minute and fired it off in probably like the greatest moment ever in the history of Dragon Ball Z. Dude, it was dope when that happened. But like all this atomic breath gets fired off at once and just like obliterates this tentacle monster. And so after that, Godzilla basically escapes hell and then is reborn back on Earth as the Godzilla that we all know and love. Does anything about this comic make sense? Not really, but it's a comic book about a giant lizard that screams like a girl shooting atomic breath out of his mouth. Stop asking questions. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching. I will catch you all later. Peace.